Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first webinar in our 20-part Climate Action webinar series for 2021. I'm Bill Burke, AIA, a longtime member of AIA California's Committee on the Environment. We're building on the success of the 2020 AIA California Climate Action webinar series. So for 2021, as I mentioned, we have 20 programs. The AIA National's Framework for Design Excellence has 10 major categories. This was formerly known as the COAT Top 10. So its goal is to organize our thinking and facilitate conversations with clients and the communities we serve and help us set goals. So this series will feature monthly hour-long climate action webinars, and then we're also going to have 90-minute webinars that get into more technical topics such as the webinar today. So make sure you're subscribed to AIA California's newsletter Relevance, and you'll get the latest information on the climate action webinar series and other AIA events and happenings. So a couple of things before we get started. Just want to remind you that you can visit AEC Knowledge to take care of those required accessibility continuing ed units. And these courses are different than kind of many of the other ADA courses, and they'll hold your attention and help you think a bit differently. Today's session qualifies for 1.5 AIA HSW learning units for those watching live. It's also being recorded and will be shared on the AIA California website after the event. Additional resources and a PDF of the presentation will be made available shortly after the presentation is over. Also, we want this to be interactive if you have questions. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions in there. I will bring them to Janika's attention, and she'll answer them, when appropriate. So today's webinar is on design for integration, and we're going to really sort of, Janika is going to talk about how integrated design brings greater value to the owner, improved durability, better environments for occupants, and buildings that use less energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So a part of this is the goal setting process, the role of the architect in the process, clarity about the owner's project requirement, the basis design, and tracking project goals. So I'm just going to briefly tell you about Janika's background. Janika has I think about 12 or 15 years of experience in the sustainable building industry at this point. She worked as an architect for 8 years, including at EHDD. She has worked on a lot of zero net energy and LEED platinum buildings, including the Packard Foundation, the Exploratorium, Andrew Science Hall at Pomona College. And she's worked on some of those are zero net energy buildings and LEED platinum buildings. Prior to working at Integral Group, she had a position at the University of California Office of the President, leading efforts on climate action planning and green building policy and implementation. I could go on. She's been at Integral Group for several years now, and as Integral is, as it says, kind of an engineering firm that does a lot of stuff beyond just engineering, and works with a lot of architectural teams and building owners to sort of tie the groups together. And that's really Janika's strength, is as an architect who has a lot of interest in technical topics. She's really about getting the team to work together. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Janika. She's got a lot of stuff to cover in a relatively brief amount of time. I will mention, in case, I expect Janika is probably going to point this out, I used to be at the PG&E Pacific Energy Center and worked with Janika on doing 4 90-minute webinars on integrated design. Those are once again being offered by PG&E later this spring, starting in March. So this presentation today is kind of a quick overview. If you want more information and more details, you can sign up for those webinars through the PG&E Energy Training Center. With that, I'll turn things over to Janika.
Great. Thanks so much, Bill, and welcome everyone. Excited to be here and to have so many folks online, and really hope that I can offer some bits of insight into what integrated design means, what it could mean for your work and your projects, and really hope that you use the question and answer chat function to let me know if you want more information, if you want me to expand on anything. I'll try and pause throughout the presentation today to just make sure that we're actually delivering content that's useful and of interest to you. And as Bill mentioned, I'm an architect. I'm now with Integral Group, which is a mostly mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering firm headquartered in Oakland, but we are national and international actually. And we focus on deep green engineering, so a lot of our work is around net zero energy, net zero carbon, high performing sustainable buildings. And my role is as an integrated design lead, so I help project teams come together around these more complex sustainability goals, high performance goals, as well as I work on policy and sort of master planning scale work to help develop sustainability standards, climate action planning work, that sort of thing. So I have a pretty unique role in the firm, and really excited to talk to you today about some of the things that I've learned along the path about what integrated design means. As Bill mentioned, the offering through the PG&E Energy Center is not online yet, but will be soon for this new year. I think our first session is going to be in March. So I've essentially done a mashup of the 4 sessions here for you today, trying to touch on a little bit of everything. So if there's more information or something sparks your interest, please look for the announcement of those programs that will be coming out in the spring. And we've actually adapted a couple of them. There's going to be a new one that's focused on design for a changing climate, which I'm excited about developing, that'll be looking at the impact of all of the electrification ordinances and moving towards design for a zero carbon future. So with that, I'll get started. So what is integrated design anyways? I think it's a term that gets used a lot, and there is no easy one size fits all. I think it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of practitioners, but essentially it's trying to solve for the problem I'm imagining many of you that have had on a project, where you start out with these grand visions of everything you want to do and end up with something that's maybe just a semblance of what that initial vision was. So how can integrated design help in the process to be able to make sure that those grand visions actually get implemented as much as possible? And recognizing that projects today there's so many pressures, pandemic aside, there are already so many pressures on our work in terms of cost escalation, just the system complexity. We went from having a basic internal combustion engine, to use the car analogy, to now smart cars with all kinds of computers. Buildings are very similar. There's just so much complexity to buildings now. How do we actually make it happen in a realistic way? There's more and more third-party certifications. Sustainability goals have gotten more aggressive, thankfully, but also more challenging to meet. And schedules are getting just more and more. I'm just shocked working with architecture teams now on projects to see how little time there is to actually do the work you need to make good decisions. So all of these pieces make integrated design actually even more valuable. And really, integrated design is simple in its sense. It's bringing together experts in multiple disciplines from the very beginning of the project. That's key. Want to start as early as possible to identify and achieve shared project goals through collaboration. It's not, we're not talking today at least about integrating project delivery, which is IPD, you may have heard. It's a very specific sort of template and process that's used for especially complex projects. It's similar, but has more of a structure to it in terms of how it's actually done. But there's lots of resources out there if you're interested in finding out more. But essentially, integrated design is just a different way of thinking about how we do our work and how we build our teams, with the goal of imagining that every building and every piece of infrastructure actually works, that every building is designed to fill a need and enhance our way of life, that we're building projects on time and on budget without doing harm to people or the environment, and that the buildings perform as highly as possible with all systems working in concert to support its purpose. I think, at least from my perspective, that's what integrated design is aiming to do, is making our projects really work and achieve those grand visions that we set out for them. So in a totally simplified model here, a typical process or a typical project, regardless of what the actual contract arrangement is you have each of your disciplines feeding up to the owner or the contractor their scopes, and there's collaboration across silos, but not very much. Everybody's just kind of focused on the deliverables. But an integrated project is really orienting your team around the project goals. And I think that's the fundamental shift. Instead of oriented around scope and deliverables, you're oriented around project goals. So collectively as a team, we're coming up with what those goals are, what's feasible, and we're constantly working with each other to figure out the pathway to reach those goals, recalibrating as needed throughout the process. And who's on the team will dramatically change the nature of that collaboration and process. So each project is a little bit different, and it could be expanded to include, urban planners, other owner stakeholders, university researchers, materials experts, ecosystem experts. There's lots of other folks that might fit into this puzzle, but it's seeing the whole project team as everybody's role on the project is equal and valued. And sort of characteristics are that this teaming is really highly functional, that you're highly functional, aligned around these project goals, that the collaboration is happening in a fruitful manner, that there's lots of iteration and feedback loops, so that we're not just all going on a straight up trajectory to the deliverable, we're actually acknowledging at certain points, oh, we need to investigate more. So I think architects are really great at this. This is what we're trained to do, we don't have a linear path to a solution. We go around and around, and it's really inviting our consultants in and our clients into that process as well, so that all aspects of the project, or the major aspects of the project, can have a similar kind of iterative approach. So you're really finding the best answer, best solution for the project. And when you look at, especially for high achieving projects, if you're pursuing net zero energy, for example, there are so many factors in here that just require a more engaged collaborative team. That one discipline can't figure this out on themselves. The MEP engineers can't figure this out for themselves. It needs collaboration with the architect, with the owner, with landscape, etc. And at least from our perspective at Integral, that we're really looking to do more with the building, which is great for architects. We're trying to shift cost from mechanical and electrical into the architecture, because the architecture really is the first mechanical system. If you can design the envelope and the building well enough to reduce the load enough, then you're essentially taking pressure off the mechanical and electrical systems to do the work of heating and cooling or ventilating your building for you. So by having an integrated design process and some higher performance or sustainability goals, you can really start those conversations at the early phase to figure out what are the key strategies that the architecture can do to make that happen. Another key component of integrated design is to look at the whole design process for opportunities to use analytics and use your team to inform design decisions. So especially when it comes to energy modeling, we often see that the sort of traditional MEP work happens more in design development, construction documents, that there's maybe early on in concept, there was a shoebox model or something that one of your architectural staff was able to pull together to look at shading or orientation or something, but then it kind of drops off, and then really in DD and CDs, you're just looking for compliance or looking for an updated lead model, that the energy modeling at that stage isn't informing the design. But what we're looking for with an integrated design process is to use your analytics capacity in your team to test ideas throughout design, not just in concept, not just at the end before permit. It's a small upfront investment if you can expand that scope compared to the mistakes that can be made by committing too early or too late to a bad idea or finding out, in construction documents that your whole shading scheme doesn't work, or uh, I'm trying to think of another example, but it's super useful if you can at least build in concept and SD and DD, an iterative approach to modeling. So it's not just compliance, you're really looking to solve problems. So I just wanted to share an example of that, where we worked with an architect client in the Pacific Northwest who had this shading scheme that was quite complex. It was part of their design intent, but it was also serving a purpose. We knew we had this particular jurisdiction had really aggressive energy use intensity targets for each project, as well as thermal energy use intensity targets, which means that we had to really watch how much solar load was coming into the building and what the heating demand requirements were for the project. So we had been assuming the shading component was part of the project from the beginning in order to meet these city requirements, as well as integrating it into a natural ventilation and radiant ceiling approach. So it was all very much layered and nuanced in the design. But at a certain point, because of VE and client concerns, we had to really demonstrate that the exterior shading component was doing why it was needed, essentially. So we used the analysis that we'd already developed to try and develop a story around why it was so important and explain how all these nuanced layers of the building and its systems were so necessary. So we use diagrams a lot. We try and explain in a more narrative fashion how the different pieces of a building works together, and then also used just the metrics that we had available of what the impacts would be to the building on the cooling load, on the how often the blinds would come down, how that would affect views and daylight. So some of these more qualitative experiences of the user, how it would impact our natural ventilation scheme, and then what the impact would be to the mechanical systems. So if we didn't have the brise-soleil, for example, the perimeter cooling would be 3 times larger. So that has a cost impact. Then we also used our daylighting analysis to help tweak the exterior brise-soleil system so that they had this module that kind of replicated over the facade, but it wasn't tuned to orientation. And the shape of it was causing some glare issues for users. So at the same time as we were kind of reanalyzing the facade to make sure it worked for the mechanical system, we also reviewed the daylight and the thermal comfort component of the brise-soleil. And we're able to come up with some suggestions of how that might be tweaked to better perform for the architect to consider, as well as how it could be rolled out on the facade in different ways. Because on the east facade, we had more flexibility in terms of what shapes would really work, how much sun you could really let in and still get the right performance that we were looking for. But that was going to be different than the southeast facade. So if you see on the, sorry, I have multiple screens, so I'm going to look at another screen for a second, where you all are. You can see here that we had, these 4 and 5 modules would be great for the southeast facade, but on the east facade, we could have more. And then it would be different on the southwest facade. So this type of analysis in DD really helped the architect tune their solutions to not only meet the client's need to understand why this was important, but also to get the facade to work as best for the project as possible. So ultimately, it's trying to use the tools and the information you have available to describe how everything works together so you don't lose your design intent. either from an architectural perspective or from mechanical, electrical, plumbing's perspective, or even, landscape, civil, all of our other consultants. I'm certainly speaking from more the engineering and architecture side today, but there's lots of ways in which this same sort of principles that I'm talking about apply to other disciplines too. It's just, how do we describe why we're making these decisions in order to justify them and to help everybody understand the implications for their disciplines. So I'm going to just pause here. I've seen my screen flash a few times, just going to check if there's any questions or anything like that. There's some chats, great. Looks like everything's all right, so we'll keep moving on. Let me know if there's any questions that pop up for anyone. And in terms of how to do it, so architects as conductors, I think that we are in an excellent position to know when to lead and when to support others in leading. If you can tap into sort of the unexpected enthusiasm about an issue that comes from a consultant team that may not have direct control over that particular scope, but has a real interest to help them lead it, essentially, in resolving it, that can be a really useful tool. So essentially empowering others to lead on resolving an issue. That you as an architect have the sort of broad brush scope of understanding what all these pieces are, that you can help find the value proposition for clients and advocating for that additional scope for the analysis you might need, or just for the piece of the design that is this more complex but exciting, that has real value to the project. Find what the value proposition is and advocate for it. Use your consultant team to help fill that in and flesh it out for the client or the contractor. If you don't have an example yourself or don't know, find the consultants that do. So if you haven't done a more a higher performing project before, but you really want to, find the consultants that can support you in doing that and are used to working in this kind of iterative way. And so as an architect, you know who to call on, who to bring together. Really importantly, what questions to ask, where the gaps are in the design, and how to follow up. So it's a mix of project management as well as sort of lateral thinking that I think architects can really drive the integrated design process in an effective way. It's also super important to set up a team culture within this project team that fosters creativity. So not only within the consultant team, but obviously within your own design teams. Just how do you think more creatively and more deeply about a project and potential solutions? That you're holding everyone responsible for success. So there's no void of responsibility. So figuring out what is the scope of the project, what elements are going to be really championed by who on the project, and helping others feel empowered to step into gaps too. That you really want team members to feel like they have a voice regardless of their scope, that they can bring best-in-class ideas even if they're not the prime consultant. And some way to reward the innovators. And sometimes that's as simple as just talking them up to the client, or just saying that Julie had this great idea that on a team call, just giving them acknowledgement can be a huge lift to team members feeling like they can actually contribute in areas where maybe they wouldn't typically. And I think a great example of sort of an integrated design solution that just requires a different approach than business as usual is something like alternative water sources. If you're looking at a site and wanting to integrate some alternative water system reuse system, you have rainwater, which is both civil, landscape, architecture. You have obviously plumbing if this water source is going to be coming into the building. You have the owner, which has implications to how that water reuse might affect their own understanding of how occupants might interact with it, or maintenance considerations. So it's especially these issues that are cross-purpose and cross-team member that may otherwise get lost if there's no champion for it, and if there's there isn't a venue to be able to explore what the possibility is together. No one discipline can solve the solution. So that gets to my next slide of finding your champions. So, you know, you need a champion, especially for it doesn't have to be for everything. There might just be like 3 key things that your project's trying to achieve that just need more attention and more of this integrated approach. So each identified issue can, you know, has a champion, someone to advocate, someone to see it through, to connect the dots and wave their hand at each milestone and say, this still isn't resolved. I need these 3 meetings to be able to figure it out. That the champions can help create that best for culture, best for project culture. And that also one of the champions is a cost champion. So whomever is really holding the cost, budgeting, or, you know, if it's the owner or the contractor, making sure that they're part of all of these integrated design conversations, so that they're aware not only of the importance of these decisions for the project, but what the cost benefits could be, how you can use your cost milestones to help understand what the implications are and get better perspective on alternatives. And, you know, to find those champions, they can come from unexpected places. And really, it's finding out what people are passionate about and encouraging that, so that it doesn't have to rest on the shoulders of the architect or the project manager to figure all this out, but that everybody is supporting each other in figuring it out.
Janika, this is Bill.
Yes.
We have 2 questions. One actually came in the chat. I'll raise that one first. So that one is, as a building owner, city municipality, what should we do to find the right consultants, and what reports, studies should we have in place to support the team and have a successful project?
That's a great question. We go a little bit more into that, especially for energy in the series. But I think one of the important ways to do that, especially from an owner perspective, is in writing your RFPs to require, you know, evidence that the consultants applying have experience doing the type of project that you want, that they've worked on multiple net zero energy projects or high performance sustainability projects, that they, in their approach narrative, can really describe the process in this way, that they understand what integrated design means, and that you can get a sense from the way that they're writing it that they, you know what they're talking about. And then there's specific milestone deliverables that you can ask for too, so that at each, you know, end of phase schematic design, DD, CD, etc., that there's reporting on progress on specific items. There's also a lot that you can do within your own design standards, if you have them, to develop design standards in an integrated design roadmap. We've done that for a number of clients to map out how consultant teams should approach the process, as well as what the building requirements are that would kind of force the process. So if you have more higher performance goals, it's honestly going to bring to the table consultants that, you know how to do a net zero energy design, or living building challenge project, for example, which just by their nature require a more integrated approach. So I'm happy to, if you want to reach out afterwards, I can provide some more resources or follow up with the PG&E webinar where we dive in a little bit more to that.
So Janika, the next question, and this is one that, we could do a day-long webinar on, but it's about energy modeling, a question we oftentimes get. So it says, for the early intensive modeling you talk about to inform the design, is the modeling typically done by the mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer, or the architect? What are the pros and cons of who owns and does the modeling?
Great question.
One thing, Janika and I have known each other for a long time. So Janika, is it okay if I say something and then turn it over to you?
Go for it, Bill.
So I would actually suggest the AIA, and I'll find the link, has an excellent document on integrating energy modeling in the design process. And I think partly this gets at what size is the project, what size is the team, what are the abilities and skills of the architect. The AIA document talks about single, boy, I'm blanking out on the term, but basically looking at one aspect of a design like shading, an architect may be able to do that. Certainly as you get into whole building analysis, unless you have skilled members in your architecture office, the MEP is going to do that. But more than anything, I think really what you want to do is say, it depends. It depends on the building. It depends on the skills of the architecture office. And what you really want is a plan about who is doing the modeling, what questions need to be answered and when, and how the team is going to get together to review the answers. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Janika.
Thanks, Bill. Well, I think you're exactly right. Unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all. It's definitely depends on the qualifications of all the folks involved. So, architects can certainly do the early phase modeling, doing the shoebox modeling type analysis if they have the understanding and the expertise to do so. And I think there's like Safera and AutoCase, there's lots of tools out there now that firms can use to do that early phase modeling. The challenge that I've seen is not necessarily understanding what they're modeling. So a design team might do something and then not understand the results, or not understand that they actually had the orientation wrong or something. So that's where I think it depends on your capacity in-house to do that. And in terms of energy modeling, I really think that there's some excellent energy modelers, either that are in sustainability consultant firms or that are independent, that can be great. The challenge with having them separate from the MEP engineers is that there's no accountability then, that or that you really have to work to link the energy modeling results to the MEP design decisions. So I think it's definitely possible, but again, there needs, whenever you have separate scopes, it makes it more difficult to get that integration going. So I think it's again, totally feasible, depends on how the scope is written, and then depends on how you leverage it within the design process to make sure that the information is actually informing the design. And then in terms of, I see another question about references, about how integrated design yields value, saves the client money. I don't have any at my fingertips. I can look at some after this and see if I can forward them on to Hillary to distribute. But I will be talking about a couple of examples where there was very key economic benefits of doing this. So hopefully can provide an example there. So just in terms of, again, how we start doing an integrated design process in a different way, I think we haven't met in person in a long time, so the next couple of slides are a little bit funny to talk about because I don't know when this is going to happen again. But I've been in a lot of consultant coordination meetings, either virtually or in person, where it's unclear why I'm there. That I don't have a role. We're not talking about necessarily my scope. It's like, maybe I should be in here to actually understand what the decisions are that are being made. But I think an integrated design process is really, you're not just having a weekly check-in here. You're really using meetings to your advantage to dive into the issues you're facing on the design, that you are trying to bring that best for project culture into each meeting, to workshop solutions, and to really let your team come up with those answers. So, that you're trying to keep it, I'll talk about how to do this virtually, but in an in-person environment, it's low tech, you're keeping people off their devices. You have breakout tables or breakout rooms in the Zoom world, that you're topic focused, so that the people that are there really understand why they're there, and that you're keeping your audience engaged throughout, so that people aren't just multitasking the whole time and just chiming in for their one little quip of why. That you have a facilitator who's taking notes and not driving a presentation, that your workshop itself is facilitated, so that there is a clear person responsible for keeping things moving. And that might be the architect, but it might be somebody else on the team who just happens to be really good at it. And again, you're being reminded in each workshop of what the essential goals are for the project. So each discipline can understand how they relate to the big picture and where the synergies between those goals are between their work, so that you can optimize for simplicity and for cost. with complexity of high performance buildings, it's really impossible for one person to know everything. I mean, in general buildings, this is not a one person kind of endeavor, but you have a team of experts at your disposal. So make sure that everybody feels like you can do some multidiscipline problem solving together. And getting clear in the beginning of a project on who's going to be responsible for what. For which of the goals is somebody going to champion, as we talked about? What are the outcomes that you're looking for? How you're going to track towards those outcomes? And who's going to own the whole sort of integrated design process? I would say that's most effectively architects, but it could be the sustainability consultant or the contractor or the owner or somebody else on the team, scoped at least to provide that sort of whole picture. And this will really vary depending on your project. It can look really different what the team structure is, who owns the process, etc. It'll change project to project depending on your team size and what the goals are, etc. So anticipate that each time you're going to be kind of redoing it, but that in part by putting that structure together with your team that helps onboard everybody to the process. And I just threw these in here in terms of tools for online collaboration. I'm sure all of you have a lot you could offer and what you've learned that works and doesn't. But, obviously this is a lot harder to do in a virtual world. Especially for these more complex meetings or kind of workshop-y kind of topics, I require that all team members use video. I really try and keep meetings small or use breakout rooms. I like, at least in the Zoom platform, to have like 12 and under participants because that's just one screen gallery. So I think just keeping that in mind, if it's possible to keep your meetings smaller, break up larger meetings into smaller components. Don't go more than 2 hours because people get exhausted. And to really call on people. So go around your virtual room and make sure everyone contributes more than once, ideally, and find collaboration tools that work. I mean, one of the benefits of our new virtual environment is all of these amazing tools that are out there. And I'm not advocating for Mural or Miro in particular, but they're just examples of sort of online sticky boarding, brainstorming tools that can really help. And you can have an interactive component as part of that. So it's also a great way to document the process. But no matter what, keeping clear notes about how especially these virtual meetings go is super important. Yeah, somebody agreeing Miro is excellent. They're very similar offerings here. But so then how do you actually maintain success? You've built this best for project culture. How do you actually keep things going? And I think architects can really lead in this process, but it can be whomever is sort of owning the project. The ownership of coordination and tracking will vary with project delivery model, but architects as lateral thinkers have the key understanding of how all the pieces need to fit together, I think. So leverage that understanding to drive the process. Setting up clear deliverables and timelines, kind of as I suggested for owners in your RFPs, to make sure that sustainability and performance requirements are embedded in the documents and deliverables at all stages of design and in all sub-consultant contracts, that you build in additional meeting time or workshop time into those sub-consultant contracts and making sure that they understand their deliverables. So end of phase reporting, like 100% concept, SD, DD, 50%, and 100% CD are kind of standard, at least from the projects that, as I approach it, for reporting on progress towards these high performance sustainability goals. And that at each start of phase, you're reviewing the progress and the issues to be resolved. So oftentimes, we've generated like 80-page documents as part of the basis of design narrative or the deliverable, and then we never talk about them again. But trying to actually make sure that at the beginning of each phase, you're reviewing what was done for all disciplines, what the gaps are, and what needs to be resolved in the next phase, and figuring out a plan of how you're going to get there, so that there's some accountability both for what was missed and what was not working, and that things don't just fly off the radar because everybody's too busy. It can just be one 1-hour meeting to make sure that happens at the beginning of each phase. So I mentioned sort of workshopping specific issues as mini charrettes, that you take that kind of, so it's not just a check-in meeting, but you're really going to dig in together and workshop how you're going to resolve it. So it might just be those, 3 or 4 key components of the design that are particularly complex or require a more integrated cross-discipline approach that you just choose. Like at each phase, we're just going to do a check-in on our net zero goal at say 50% of phase, and we're going to have, architect, MEP, owner, contractor, all in the room, virtual room, kind of workshopping where we are and where we need to go with it. So things like that can just help make sure that those grittier details don't just get 5 minutes on a consultant coordination check-in. Maintaining clear communication and documentation. I mean, again, just sort of standard project management good practices here, but making sure that people know where the information is. And I'm going to be talking about tools to do that with tools that you already have, but that don't get leveraged necessarily. But document, because it's the only way to actually ensure that these key features of your project don't get lost in value engineering. Is if you can prove on why they're in there in the first place. Respecting everyone's role on the project is equally valuable. So I think it's often, the architect, structural, MEP, landscape, the bigger contracts often get most of the airtime in meetings, but recognizing that IT and all the other transportation demand management, all the other consultants that might be on your team can provide additional perspective. Maybe it's that they know the area really well, they know the jurisdiction really well, or they worked on another similar project that had similar issues and can share their stories. So really trying to make sure that everyone on the project team feels like they have value and can contribute. That you're scheduling meetings with clear agendas, and to that point of not just having everybody invited, that you're making sure that the people are at the meeting who are responsible for working out the issues. And sometimes that means that people just have to attend, understand what's happening on the project, but really trying to limit the invite all kind of approach. Including sustainability, I've already mentioned this, but including sustainability and performance goals at each deliverable and revisiting at the beginning of and middle of phases is just so important. And before I move into tools, I'll just check, there seems to be a question here. In terms of high performance meetings, workshops, have you found that better, more detailed agendas and pre-workshop homework yields good results? It depends. I find that homework people don't usually do. Maybe I'm totally guilty of this, looking up the homework 5 minutes before the meeting to try to get up to speed on what is going to happen or what the issues are. I think it's certainly worth sending if you can to send homework. At least it helps with accountability, especially if that becomes a regular practice. Like, we are going to send out this analysis beforehand. But I've just come to acknowledge that you're going to have to review it no matter what during the meeting, so allowing time for that. I think what is most effective is having a good facilitator. So having somebody that can keep people on time and accountable and ask the right questions, or, if there's a lull in conversation, someone who can come up with the sort of catalyst question to get people focused again on what the issues are. So, not everybody is comfortable or good at doing that. So figuring out on the team, again, that might not be the architect. It could be your mechanical engineer is actually really great at facilitating conversations. So wherever you can on the team, kind of inviting people just to step into what they're good at will be helpful, or even hiring based on that. If you know that you have a deficiency as an architect in terms of being able to really run a meeting tightly, when you're interviewing consultants, just think about those skills that you would like to add to the team. So OPR and BOD, or the owner's project requirements and basis of design documents. These two documents live together forever. The OPR spells out the owner's wishes, and the BOD is intended to be a response to those wishes. So it's a very synergistic relationship. And typically the BOD is already updated at each project milestone. The OPR should be too. I would suggest that the owner's project requirements sometimes don't even get developed until the end of design, and the commissioning agent is stuck with doing it. I've seen that, unfortunately, a lot, especially for those clients that maybe haven't built a building before or don't necessarily even know what they want yet. It kind of gets left by the wayside. But I'm advocating here to use these documents to your advantage. So the owner's project requirements can really help outline, if you have an early sustainability charrette or project kickoff or something, that you can use that meeting to actually document the owner's project requirements, because you're spelling out goals, program, schedule, occupancy, maintenance assumptions, sustainability criteria. You can get all of those goals written down. And again, going back to that document piece, it just helps everybody remember why certain things are in the project. So if questions come up down the line, like about a brise soleil that's very expensive, this is why it's there, because it's meeting all these other criteria that the client wanted or the design team is trying to meet these standards for. So the owner's project requirements can be a real tool, and then the basis of design, really responding to those OPR as sort of documenting at each milestone how you're meeting the requirements and what's changed as well. So trying to capture in the BOD in a concise way what those decisions are at each phase can be of real value. And this comes into play especially for projects that go that are in the office for 5 to 10 years and you have multiple people change over. Just having that legacy of information, it can be so difficult to get up to speed coming onto a project, and these two documents can really help, because ideally they're describing what's in the project. They're explaining the drawings and the specifications. They're the bridge between those two documents to really explain why things are as they are. And it's also the place to not only describe your goals, but how you're going to get there. And how you're going to get there is going to be measured by a metric. So if the goal is your heart, it's your passion, it's why you care about this project, the brain is the metric saying, okay, you're going to meet it at this threshold. So the basis of design, well, the owner's project requirements can have both. They can have the goals and the metrics. For zero energy is a metric. We want to have an annual net zero energy for this project. That's a goal and a metric, as much as can be written in the OPR, but then also in the BOD to explain how the project is going to be evaluated for success ultimately, and to measure whether the design is actually meeting the intent of the project. So it's important, because integrated design, using these tools means engaging the team in a different way than business as usual, which means using these tools to your benefit. It's also really important to leverage the role of the commissioning agent early on, so that they're not just coming in late to sort of clean up the pieces with the OPR, but they are informing the basis of design and the systems as much as possible early on. As I mentioned, it helps orient new team members and document design decisions and protect from value engineering. So this is especially important for the high performance projects or the highly sustainable projects that you have something that describes why the design is as it is. And why does it never work that way? They're not typically bid documents, although in some contractual organizations they actually can be, but there's murky ownership. It's unclear who actually owns them. It's time and money. It's additional work for the team to actually do. They're not riveting. It's really hard to get excited about writing a BOD narrative. Projects, again, take years and people come and go. So something might get started and then it gets dropped. They can be way, way, way too long or way too short and too vague. They don't get updated. They're written too late in the process, so it did not have any benefit. And the language is really generic. So how do you actually make it functional? Use a good template. There's some good ones out there. Find a single point of ownership for both the OPR and BOD on the owner and on the design side. Build in updates to the documents throughout the design schedule, so that typically makes sense at each sort of project milestone. Delete what becomes irrelevant. Don't just use copy paste language. Keep it concise and specific. It doesn't have to be a novel. it could just be one line per strategy. This is our goal, this is our metric, and this is the strategy or the solution technology we're using to get there, whatever it might be. There's 2 questions that just came in. Is there an integrated design phase checklist that identifies the process and documents you were describing? There may be some out there, but I'm sure they vary a lot. There's no one size fits all, as I'm saying. I think the biggest thing is the end of phase sort of deliverable components, and I'll be talking about more of that in the PG&E series. Yes, and building officials should be included early on the project if possible. I think that's a great comment. And good OPR BOD templates, again, go into that a little bit more on the PG&E side. I can maybe share with Hillary after this if there's a way to share out documents. And so what should be included in a BOD or an OPR? It can be really broad, and these are documents that are required by Title 24 in terms of meeting the commissioning requirements, but there's no specificity around what has to be in there. So use that to your advantage. Actually make them useful documents, because you can pretty much put whatever you want in there. But essentially, hopefully you're at least covering your basics, like performance in terms of energy and thermal comfort, air quality, etc. But you can loop in here your sustainability and environmental goals, your health, economic, your functional goals, aesthetic goals, and goals for resiliency too. So all of these pieces and more can be included. And then you have your goals. You have zero energy, your zero carbon, healthy indoor air, etc. There's lots of potential goals you could have for a project. There's a metric for all of them, or they shouldn't be included in what you're using here. I really advocate for not including loose goals that you'll never be able to meet or measure. They should all be measurable in some way. And that can be difficult, especially with like an aesthetic approach or something. I think if there's any way to quantify it, it's super useful, because then you can also talk about it to the client. Like, we were able to meet this goal of yours because we met this X percentage, or whatever your metric actually is. And so where do you start to get those metrics? And the pro and con of all the different sort of tools, certification tools, and various other frameworks that are out there now is that it can be overwhelming, but that it's also, there's lots of pieces that you can pull from. So even if your project is not pursuing Passive House, for example, I've used their insulation and infiltration requirements as sort of a standard to check a project against, or included as an aspirational goal in a project. So you can borrow from all of these different frameworks to help build up your goals and your metrics. And there's, pretty much a framework for everything out there. These are some of the better ones, I think. The AIA framework for design excellence, the Living Building Challenge, the Zero Tool, Passive House, the Sustainable Sites Initiative. There's lots of stuff out there now, so it can really just give you good ideas and good ways to measure performance. But I wanted to talk more specifically, just dive in a little bit more to energy use intensity and how that can be really used as a tool to drive down the energy performance of a project and work towards our sort of climate and zero carbon goals as well. So we're starting to use, it can be called a GIGI or a GHGI target. So it's a greenhouse gas intensity target, as opposed to an energy use or EUI intensity target. So it's the same way, just providing another check of how your project might be doing in terms of its environmental performance. And it's in the same way that you can compare a car in terms of miles per gallon, and Energy Benchmark does the same for building energy use. So with an EUI, it's you're looking at the whole building energy use. So not just what's covered by code, but all of the uses in the building, including your plug loads. So my phone plugged into the wall, the printer, the monitor, etc., that wouldn't be normally captured by code is captured in the whole building energy performance target. And this energy use intensity is divided by the square foot of the building to give you a measure of how this building is performing that then you can benchmark to other buildings. So how we use that in design is by taking benchmarks from other buildings that the client might have or that we might have worked on, comparing to code, comparing to a LEED baseline energy model, comparing to a net zero energy target that we might have, and then where we think the project could go. So we typically break that out by end use and end use energy use, and sort of start to see, well, heating's our dominant demand, so we really want to target that with our energy use. Or lighting maybe is the problem, whatever it might be. Doing this kind of early analysis can really reveal where the opportunities are and where your potential targets might be. And you can do this in concept. There's, as I mentioned, lots of tools out there that can help you at least do a rule of thumb. Where do we think we can go? How far can we go on this project? So there's lots of places to find a benchmark EUI. The Architecture 2030 Zero tool is a great way to do that. Energy Star Portfolio Manager, both of those tools use the CBEX, or the Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey, that uses existing building energy use data and compiles it by building type. And you can kind of change the levers to say, I have a 20,000 square foot building, it's a K through 12 school, it's open 5 days a week, etc. You can tailor it a little bit to then get a potential energy use target. And like with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you can set a % of benchmark that you want to achieve. So for Architecture 2030, I believe it's 70% of benchmark. So it's a little confusing because it's backwards, but that means that 30% of projects have achieved this goal, or is 30% of the benchmark value. So all of these different tools can just help you at an early stage, and anybody can do this. Architects can do this, can look up an EUI and get a sense of what you might want to target, but clients can too when you're looking at an RFP. It's especially useful if clients have existing buildings to benchmark your other buildings and then to set a target based on that, where you think you can go. So the University of California has done that. The state of California has done that. We have a number of commercial clients that we've worked with to develop that specifically for their portfolios. So wherever you can kind of gather the context of energy use for a specific building type, that will help you then set your goal for the next project. And I just wanted to briefly talk about how that plays out in a design, and how it can be a useful number to have to drive design decisions. So on the Consolidated Administration Campus building, which is mostly an office building at SFO that we worked on with Perkins and Will and Mark Cavagnero and WebCore. It's a LEED Gold, but net zero energy target. And it's a progressive design build project. In this case, we had a radiant system for heating and cooling, which by its nature requires a lot of integration, because in doing radiant systems, how the architecture works really influences how the system works. So in this case, we really needed to explain to the architect and the owner and all those involved what different design decisions, how that would impact the performance of the radiant system. And that also required a set of meetings with different consultants or different team members to help inform the performance of the radiant system, because the radiant tubing goes in the structural slab potentially. So how does structural approve of that? And what do they need in terms of information from us about tubing placement, etc., needs to be discussed early in the phase. For acoustics, for radiant systems, you typically need to have the radiant surface exposed to the occupants, which means if it's in the concrete floor, ideally you don't have carpet all over it, or you just have carpet in strategic places, because the carpet dampens the effect of the radiant system. You need to talk about that with acoustics, because obviously carpet and ceiling clouds, etc., are important to maintain good acoustic quality. So how do you actually find a balance there? For the envelope, you want to limit solar gain, especially in the climate zone of San Francisco, where the project was. So, what is the facade going to be? How much window to wall ratio? What external shading is going to be possible? What is the glazing type? Need to work on the modeling of that to understand the implications for the radiant capacity and whether it can meet the demand of the load for peak cooling loads, etc. So all of these pieces were meetings that happened, multiple meetings that happened, and multiple conversations that happened. so that everybody really understood the levers that they could pull in terms of still meeting the goal and meeting the design intent. And for this project, they decided early with the net zero goal, their EUI target was 25 in order to meet the net zero capacity that the roof could carry in terms of PV. So the goal of 25 really set the boundary for how far the project could go above and below and still meet its net zero energy target. So this kind of came all to a head in a conversation through modeling that we were able to provide an analysis of all the different carpet solutions, window to wall ratios, glazing type, and number of external louvers, all these pieces, how they played together to then drive the energy performance. So in looking at this, the architect and owner could then really help to understand if they still want to meet that 25 kBTU per square foot EUI goal, then which systems would they need to actually meet to be able to get there? So again, using information design analytics to be able to inform design and recognizing that all of these pieces have many different layered implications, that it's not just an energy conversation, it's an acoustics, it's a thermal comfort, it's an aesthetic, it's a budget. All of these pieces need to be addressed within these conversations. And then I just wanted to briefly talk about sort of, how different delivery models can impact an integrated design process. And I just want to say that it can work in any and all different configurations. It depends on who's leading the project. You really need to know your audience and what they care about. The cost milestones are different between different delivery models, so that can be the biggest influence in how the pace of information and analysis might differ from project to project, and the roles and responsibilities can shift drastically. So in a typical kind of design bid build scenario, the architect sort of holds the contracts for the full design, and the contractor's doing their thing and reporting up to the owner. And the architects in that case can really lead the integrated design process because they're managing the consultants directly and coordinating the messaging to the owner. Design team and contractor then kind of have separate motivations though, so there can be some more cost challenges there. And particularly when you're not getting bidding until the end of design, that can cause more challenges too. But if you have the documentation of why a design is as it is through the OPR and BOD, then that can at least help in those conversations and those value engineering exercises. With a design build kind of project scenario, there's so many different flavors of design build. I won't get into them here, but essentially the contractor or the design builder, holds the contracts for the design team. And it can be the biggest challenge can be the handoff point when you're actually doing the bridging documents to the subcontractors, and then how much information is translated over to the subcontractors about the design and the performance goals, etc. So I think with design build there again, the documents are, the BOD and the OPR are even more critical because there has to be that translation of the design drawings and the specifications into the why these design strategies are in there and how they interact. So you can't just pull out the radiant system, for example. There's major implications if you do that. And design build too with the cost pieces of it, it can be really great because you're getting earlier cost information to design decisions. So you can really fold that into the when you're using a sort of analytic approach to design decisions, folding that cost item in as well has huge value and can really give you a much more informed decision-making process if it's done well. And then in design assist, it's even another layer of complication in terms of roles and responsibilities and how this actually looks like on a project team. But it's similar to design build with some additional layers and a lot more collaboration between team members, but some murky responsibilities, and really critical to map the responsibilities of who's going to do what, particularly for MEP, because in this case, MEP will do the design and then hand it off to the subcontractors to draw, and then actually stamp as the design engineers will stamp as the engineer of record. So there's a accountability piece that can be both good and bad. And similar to design build, there's more early cost information and cost implications. So it can be a benefit, at least when it's done well, to get more information on design implications early into decision making. And just some key traits of each delivery method. With design build, having the architect contracted directly with the owner, that's fully designed before the contractors are engaged. It's the simplest delivery method, but least opportunity for integrated design with the contractor. I think as a design team, it's great and allows you to really work through solutions in a much more in-depth way. However, it's harder to get that cost information and that contractor input unless you have pre-construction services, which could be another hybrid model. In design build, having a single contract with design builder for the entire design and construction scope shifts the risk. It really requires a defined scope from the owner. So if there's not a good owner project requirement, that can be a real challenge in a design build project to get a good result. If it's not spelled out, at the very beginning what the owner wants. It's definitely more complex to manage in terms of an integrated design process. There's less control from the owner and it's more driven by the contractor or design builder side. So their priorities can be really different, both plus and minus in that case. They can be much more informed than a typical owner might be, but the cost is usually their primary goal. So that just drives a lot of the conversations, and you have to really, as a design team, defend things in a different way. For design assist, it's similar to design build with the added element of the complexity of the roles. I think it probably has the most potential for an integrated design in terms of reaping the benefits if it's done well, but it requires a team to really work together and really develop that best for project culture, because it's just most complex to manage. And then I just wanted to finish up with a case study that tries to sort of summarize the benefits of integrated design to that question of, what are the cost benefits? This project is in construction currently. It's an affordable housing project in San Francisco, done with Mithun and VA Studio, and the contractor is Obayashi, and it's in the Mission. It's a really, really cool project. It had a very complex and extensive project team that also involved a lot of city involvement, obviously, because it's affordable housing, but there was also a health researcher. So the project is for low income and homeless families, as well as kids that are aging out of foster care, which are called transitional age youth. So they're usually there for 6 months to a year with support from the county to figure out what's next for them. There's 1 to 3 bedrooms for families and studios for the youth. And then on the ground floor, there's childcare and supportive health services. And for an integrated design project, the scale of the team is often in scale with the size of the project. But in this case, given that there was numerous stakeholders, they were all involved from the very beginning. So especially understanding that with this health researcher piece, they had a particular interest in the indoor air quality of the project, because affordable housing projects typically can have very bad indoor air quality. So it was one of the early goals to be able to actually tackle this on the project and then track performance through this health researcher involvement. So from the get-go at the early kickoff charrette, everyone was in the room. Obviously, this would be virtual these days, including the consultants and city folks, the different departments and researchers involved. The project had already gone through entitlements, so it was ready to kick off. And the question really was, what goals are we trying to tackle? There's so many out there. It could be, LEED Platinum, Living Building Challenge, Passive House. But in the workshop, cost, it's an affordable housing project, so definitely cost was a big factor. Health, as I mentioned, the health air quality was a big priority, and net zero energy rose to the top as the most mission critical. And so the project was really trying to keep it at the budget, do a lot with a little, and try and demonstrate that this was really achievable. Even though the project is a 9-story building, the design team felt like net zero energy was still possible. So then they had the question of what framework best sort of tied together these goals. Because even though sort of, green building certification systems and frameworks can be an added challenge to a project, they also provide a useful structure. So in this case, they chose Greenpoint Rated. It was the lowest cost option to meet the city's tax credit requirement for funding. And it still used passive house strategies, and net zero energy could still be a goal within that system. So it kind of could hit all the things that they wanted to do with the project and also meet the city requirements while providing the sort of most straightforward approach. And so in this case, they had AEA, or Association for Energy Affordability, in to help with that process. And what was helpful there was that they provided the point of sort of contact and tracking for the sustainability features of the design. So the design team had to report progress on their various criteria to AEA, and they tracked it and sort of owned the green point, which was really useful. It took pressure off the design team to have to track it themselves, took pressure off the architect to have to do that, while still sort of driving the intent of the goals. So just another example of where you can kind of leverage the team if you have, a sustainability consulting service and are trying to meet a certification system, use the rigor of that process to help the integrated design process. So that single point of ownership was really helpful. It forced consultant teams to provide documentation at those milestone strategies to prove that things were being met. This project benefited because everybody felt really good about working on it. They loved the mission of it. So again, that sort of integrated design circle of everybody around the project goals, this project was really able to develop that because of the mission-driven notion of it. Not every project has that, but whatever you can find that really can orient people to why they're part of this and why they want to feel good about it. But everybody wanted this project to exceed. On other projects, you can really tie it to fees and contracts in terms of trying to motivate that enthusiasm, or other shared risk and reward structures. Like I've seen that for performance-based energy goals, which is a whole other conversation, can be challenging, but also can provide just more of a carrot, pain share, gain share kind of models, or other ways to do it. So, can you actually get a better project from the extra work of integrated design? Absolutely. And one story from this project, I think, really illustrates that. So the client had typically used hydronic radiators and a condensing boiler, and they had previous projects with cost information to provide sort of context on what that would cost. And the story of this project is really the cost transfer, that little diagram that I showed, moving mechanical, electrical into the architecture. That's what this project was really able to do. So Integral Group asked for pricing on 6 different mechanical systems, and the contractor was able to price all of them because they were on board early, which was great. One was an old school electric resistance heaters, which are becoming more in vogue now that electrification is electrification ordinances are showing up everywhere, and it's actually possible to do in the Bay Area in an energy efficient way. They're often associated with high operating costs and Title 24 issues, but the price difference was huge upfront. It was a $3.4 million difference between the hydronic radiator condensing boiler solution and the electric resistance heaters. So if you can save $3.4 million, what can you transfer it to? In that case, the envelope. So the typical 2x6 metal stud wall with 1/2 inch of continuous insulation, which would have been sort of the standard for this project otherwise. it's been associated with mold issues because typically affordable housing has higher occupancies than other typical housing projects. And if we moved to a 2x6 metal stud with 3 inches of rigid insulation, exterior insulation, and using fiberglass clips to reduce the thermal bridging. So they use that with a rain screen. It actually reduced the number of electric resistance heaters that were needed. And then in terms of ventilation, typically bathroom fans are used for continuous exhaust with maybe a trickle vent or something at the exterior wall. So it sucks air from the facade, but most of the air due to bad pressurization in buildings comes from the hallway, which isn't filtered, it's not outside air. So that's really what leads to the terrible air quality is bad pressurization and those systems not actually working as intended. So Intergroup proposed using an HRV in each unit, which balances the air coming in and going out, and it's all fresh air. So if it's a cool night in San Francisco, we have these great diurnal temperature swings, and the inside temperature is warmer than your set point, it'll actually do a night flush purge and bypass the heat recovery element. So you just get the cool, fresh air to help cool down the building. And the structure of the building is exposed concrete. So that that gives you the thermal mass that further benefits from a night flush approach. Another component is if you normally be providing ventilation air with shared ductwork from say a centralized system or something like that, it's a pathway for bed bugs. And so obviously maintenance doesn't like that. So the HRVs meant that there was no shared ductwork between units. The challenge with them is that they have 2 filters in every single unit, and there's an HRV unit in 136 residential units, and they need to be changed out every 6 months. So through an integrated design process and the conversations that we were having not only with the design team but also with the owner and the operations team, they realized that they have to do these health well-being checks every 6 months. So they combined the maintenance task with that health check-in. So they weren't having to go into units and disturb occupants and residents more than that. They just combined something they were already doing to be able to make the HRVs really feasible. Another piece was that they fully ducted the range hoods to the outside instead of in a lot of low-cost apartments that use a recirculating hood, which really then affects indoor air quality because it's not actually pulling out the contaminants in the air. So with those combined strategies, the indoor air quality will really improve for these residents. And also it made a way to actually figure out how to use that money most effectively. By increasing the insulation of the exterior wall, it allowed us to reduce the number of electrical resistance heaters and add in the HRVs. So even though the HRVs were a $3 million add, and the HRVs and the continuous 3-inch insulation on the exterior, it still saved $500,000. So, and uses about half the energy of a typical building this size. So I think it's a great story about how all of these different layers need to come together. So there was the goal around indoor air quality, the goal around energy, obviously the goal around cost, and all of those pieces had different champions. So obviously the owner was carrying, the overall goals of the project, especially cost. The engineers were really passionate about the net zero energy piece. And the researchers and the owners and occupants obviously around the indoor air quality, but everybody could come together and workshop the solutions to make sure that this was feasible in a way that would benefit the occupants, the owner, and the project overall. So with that, I have about 10 minutes left for questions, and we just would love to hear from the virtual room if anybody has anything they wanted to follow up on.
Janika, this is Bill, and I'll just mention, I think you said this at the start of the discussion at that last project. A lot of that was driven by the maintenance people, wasn't it? That they actually felt that the electric resistance heaters would just require much less ongoing maintenance on their part than the hydronic system. So while there are many things about the hydronic system that we like, just from an ongoing, particularly in sort of low-cost housing, the ongoing maintenance cost to maintain that system was perceived to be higher than the electric resistant heat.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bill. And I should also say that it also allowed the project to get off fossil fuels, so it's not a gas-powered project; it's all
Yeah.
electric. But yeah, there was multiple savings to going from a maintenance standpoint and an operational standpoint from going all electric.
Janika, another question that came in really had to do with whether or not you have a preferred delivery type. And I'll tell you, I actually wrote a reply, which I said that, you and I have spoken about this over the years, and that my understanding of your take was that it really depends on the building type, and it also very much depends on the owner's previous experience with sort of building design, construction, and operation, so that the involvement of the owner and the degree to which the owner, has experience, knowledge, and ability to sort of be involved affects this. And so my point was that I didn't think you had a preferred delivery method, that it really, as we tend to say all the time, it sort of depends on the project, it depends on the team, and in particular, it depends on the owner. Is that reasonably accurate, or what would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, as an architect, I just was brought up to love design bid build because that allows the most design flexibility and the most control over design. I've seen especially cringe in some projects seeing how some design build details are constructed because there's just less control of that, and I love the details. But I think design build can really have a lot of benefits. And these design assist models, it's just the priority shift and where you can put your emphasis as a design team into working things through shifts. So I think, excellence is possible in any of the delivery models. It really does depend on your team and its understanding of how to leverage the delivery model process to get the best result.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you telling me on the Exploratorium project, which for those people who aren't familiar with it, it's an interactive museum, science museum, and it was a renovation of a historic pier that actually juts out into San Francisco Bay. That you told me that the design bid build process for that, given the complexity and the goals of the project, was really important, and that it was key that you had sort of pre-construction services cost estimating from the, a contractor as part of that, but that really you did need to sort of spell things out more on that project because of both its complexity and its high performance goals. So question just came in on the SF housing project. Has that been published as a case study? Do you know, is that?
That's a good question. I don't think that it has, but I'll check with our team and see if there's anything out there. And then in terms of the metrics on indoor air quality performance, I don't have any of those offhand, but I'd have to look in our files to see if we do. And it's going to be an ongoing research project once the occupants are in. I think they are in the spring, I want to say. The deadline shifted a little bit. So once they've been in there for a year or so, I'd imagine there'd be a report that comes out about the performance.
Okay. Janika, I'll mention that I looked at the PG&E website, and it looks to me like at least the first webinar you're doing, which if I'm correct, is 3/18/2021.
That sounds right, yeah.
Integrated design for non-residential and multi-unit residential, overcoming design and management challenges, is up on their website. And I'll mention that those webinars are at 9 a.m. Pacific time and run for 90 minutes. So they are not at noon. So just kind of be aware of that. But that I did see that that is up on the website.
Thanks for checking.
Fantastic job of covering a huge amount of material in a limited amount of time. So thank you so much for that, Janika. Really great job.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it, and appreciate everybody's attention out there.
Yeah.
Please reach out if you have any further questions or anything you want to have further information on. I can try and dig it up.
Okay, and then we will be, Hillary will be sending out a link so that they can download your slides. And there will be a recording of this webinar available on the AIA California website. So if you do have coworkers, colleagues that you would like to see this, you can point them to that recording and they can benefit from it. So we got a couple minutes left, but I think we're pretty much done. So again, thanks a lot, Janika, and we will be following up with an email with a few more links. Okay.
Great, thanks everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, Hillary, I'll